If you can learn to just say, all right, but I know that this isn't you, and I'm going to change. If you can do that, then you've gained a great victory. If you can do it even then, well, when you can do that, then let me think of another example here to help you to get a fuller picture of what I'm trying to say. Somebody the other day who prides herself on being very truthful. I was saying to her, you're not being truthful at all. You think you're being truthful because you say, yes, I did go to town and I know you told me not to, or something like that. Or I told you I wouldn't and then I did, or whatever. Being truthful in little petty ways like that. I said, I don't mean to put that down. It's very good. I myself, if I say I'm going to the farm and then later decide I don't need to go to the farm, if I can, I'll go anyway just because I said I would. I don't like to break my word. I consider truthfulness important. But at the same time, it's a trivial thing compared to what we're really talking about. And I said, you need to learn that love is the high truth. Kindness is a high truth. To say things, to be considerate to people rather than just brutal, that's a higher kind of truth. Not to leave the lower, but find a way to put something so that everybody benefits. Truth is always beneficial. And she said, oh, but people love me. I said, listen, I love you. You're lovable. That doesn't change the fact that this is not lovable. And you are not being truthful when you talk like that, because what you're trying to tell me is I'm wrong. What you're trying to tell me is that, oh, no, I am truthful. No, you're not really seeing me as I am. Because people love me, you think that excuses the fact that in some ways they don't. I've seen this happen again and again when counseling people, that they will, instead of accepting the one thing that you say, they try to substitute something else to take its place, thinking that that excuses or totally nullifies this. And if you understand that you are a mixture of many traits, and that certainly you will have good traits as well as bad, but the presence of those good traits does not excuse the presence of the bad ones. And so don't ever kid yourself by coming in and saying, oh, but, and then think about these things. Look at yourself as you really are. When I say you mustn't accept or be identified with a particular personality trait, I don't mean that you mustn't face the reality of it, because you can only deal with a thing when you can face the reality. If I see my swimming pool out here, and it looks so nice from the deck, and if I were to say, oh, I don't want to go outdoors and get my feet in the mud, I'd like to dive off the deck here into the swimming pool, and my mind easily soars from the deck to the swimming pool. But that's a distance of about 30 feet or more, and I would not reach the swimming pool if I dived. And I doubt that anybody would be able to reach the swimming pool if he dived. The reality of it is that I have to go down there and get closer. Well, a lot of people don't deal with realities. A lot of people try to kid themselves that by affirming that it doesn't exist, like that story of, well, you all who went to the Saturday night show heard the story, saw the story of the Catholic and the Baptist and the Christian Scientist. Some of you may not have been there, so I'll tell it again because it's pertinent to what we're talking about here. The Catholic, Baptist, and Christian Scientist died and went to hell, and they were trying to figure out how they got there. And the Baptist figured maybe he wasn't totally immersed at the time of baptism, and the Catholic said, well, maybe he missed Mass one Sunday. Reasons, aren't they? And then they turned to the Christian Scientist, and they said to the Christian Scientist, well, how come you're here? And Kalyani, since you were acted this great role, why don't you say the answer?
But I'm not.
And so, oh, but I'm not. People think, oh, but this isn't so. But you can't close your eyes to reality just by denying its existence. That's the advantage of psychoanalysis. I think perhaps the only advantage, basically. But we'll let that pass. I think that To be able to face yourself as you really are is important. What I feel about psychoanalysis, not to leave it on a level of joking because it's a serious practice, is that I think it's a delusion to think that just by seeing a thing you've overcome it. They think that if they can just show you something, then, oh, well, you've recognized it. So it's not that easy. There's a long distance between recognizing that you've got something to overcome and finally being free of it. And talking it out is not satisfactory. In fact, I've very often seen that when people talk about a thing, they think they've accomplished it. And so they no longer put energy into really doing it. This is a very interesting point, that especially when you deal with very intelligent people, they're so clever that they are able to sort of bring their minds around to the thought that, oh yes, they've understood it perfectly and they know all about it, but they still are exactly the same. It's more important to give people things to do that will bring out those qualities. In other words, if somebody needs to learn compassion, it's not enough for him to understand that he needs to learn compassion. This is sort of armchair psychology. What would be much better for him to do would be to get out there and spend a day a week maybe serving the sick or the poor. And he'll wake up after a year suddenly realizing that he feels for them. This is an example which might work in one case and not in another, but it's by doing that we are able to really accomplish these things. So what we need to do is recognize what we really are. We have to see what we have to work on. Well, we have to be willing to see it. I've noticed in counseling people, sometimes it doesn't necessarily help them to tell them what they need. It depends on the personality. You can't let them get away with not facing reality, with snowing it under and pretending it doesn't exist. But you don't necessarily have to talk about it, because if they do the right thing, they'll come to understand it anyway. Whereas if you talk about it, they get all confused. Some minds are not capable of thinking things through that well. And I've found that if you give them a job to do, if you give them a direction to go in, and they can't accept it even, if you tell them, they would reject it. I've found that there are times when it's preferable not to tell them why. Because if they understood why, they wouldn't do it. They'd think, oh, he doesn't understand. But if they do it, they suddenly come to the point where they understand. And they haven't put up that intellectual barrier there. Anyway, as a general rule, it's important to be able to face the reality of it on whatever level you're capable of handling it. It is important. To face the reality is still only the first step. To see what these qualities are, and then to learn how to play with them. What are these qualities? They are not you, all right? Then what are they? Well, these qualities depend, first of all, on different levels of consciousness. It's very interesting how when I was thrown into that mood that I talked about in the path, my consciousness was pulled down to the lower chakras. And when I put my mind very strongly here at the point between the eyebrows, it was raised to the higher chakras, and automatically I thought differently. Master said that thoughts are universally, not individually rooted. And an interesting fact is that people on a particular plane of consciousness will tend to think alike, no matter where they're from. They can live in different countries, they can have different languages, different traditions, they'll still tend to think alike. And if you understand yourself well enough and can see how these different levels of consciousness have affected you at different times in your life, you'll be able to understand people all over the world, because they're really not different from you. Thoughts are universally, not individually rooted. And where you are at that particular point, the thoughts that pertain to that particular level of consciousness will come crowding in. They are not you, okay? Then what are they? Well, they are a universal state of consciousness pertaining to that level, but they are also a particular energy directed toward that level. If you can remove the energy from that level, you will find that automatically the energy that made you have this trait is giving you another trait. That the energy toward selfishness is the same energy that you use toward being generous. If you understand that, there are several things you can do. One is to try to think of that opposite trait to the negative trait you're overcoming. Opposite, complementary, whatever it might be. It may not be opposite. It may be any trait that can act specifically on that trait in such a way as to deflect it and direct it upward. I noticed this, it's an example I've often given here too, that years ago I went to Europe. My allowance at that time in the monastery was $15 a month. Not enough to really carouse on, but I had saved a little bit, and I was buying presents for everybody at Mount Washington. And I had enough to buy little things for them, but I wanted to buy for all my friends there. And I had about $12 left. I forget how I got that much money. Maybe my dad gave me some because I went to visit him. I don't remember anymore. But anyway, I had $12 left. And I saw a beautiful statue of the Virgin Mary. And I thought, oh, I'd like to get that for myself. Everything else I'd bought for the others. And I thought, no, I haven't gotten anything for Dayama yet, and how she'd love this statue. And so I satisfied the desire for personal possession by buying it for her. And whenever I would visit her room, I would see it there, and it was always a pleasure, where really if it had stayed in my room, I'd have stopped looking at it probably. And not only that, but Divine Mother fulfilled that desire years later by giving me, somebody in Italy gave me this beautiful statue of the Virgin Mary here, which you can't see too well because it's against the light of the window, but if you like later you can look at it. It's very sensitive and at least as beautiful, perhaps more so, than the one that I gave Dayama. So in giving, Divine Mother gave it back to me too. But meanwhile, what I did consciously was purchase this thing, but not for me, for somebody else, and in that way helped to deflect that desire for possession by getting it and giving it. This is a simple example of the sort of thing that you can do in many different directions. For example, if you feel lazy, don't give yourself time to be lazy. Or, a very good example that Nitai came up with, that if you feel lazy and also are not very rich and need to save your shekels, and you wake up in the morning and know it's time to get up, but don't have the energy to get up, turn your flashlight on and roll it over to the other side of the room, and your worry about letting those batteries will go down, that the batteries will go down will force you to get up and turn off the flashlight. So that's using one quality, avarice, to overcome another quality, laziness. And what you will find very often is that if you are sufficiently detached from yourself to observe your different personality traits, you will be able to help offset one by concentrating on another. That's why work and seva, service, is so important. It's sort of like having two scales, and you're putting more and more weight on the good side until finally this side becomes heavier and the other side is lifted up. Getting good karma, doing good things, not necessarily always in relation to that specific thing, but for instance with me, Master told me that my greatest fault in past lives was doubt. I don't have doubt now, but by teaching and helping other people to resolve their doubts, I do several things. I overcome the karma of having doubted. I also reaffirm in my mind the faith that I've acquired. And finally, I use what had been a fault and has become a virtue, because I do have a lot of faith, to be, my very fault became the means or the cause by which I have been able to serve. You'll find that this often is true. People, well, it's hard to find it, but imagine it, because this is how it works. People who have been very sickly in one life and have overcome that are the ones who are more likely to be doctors or nurses now, because they have felt that pain of physical suffering. Psychologists are very often people who have been unbalanced before, and some of them are still. Well, anyway. And so they have that compassion, or at least sense of identity with this. Policemen will often be people who have been criminals before. People who want to teach spiritually are those who have suffered spiritually before. Our very fault, and this is something to keep in mind, just as when you break a bone, the part that heals is stronger than the rest of the bone. So your very faults can become your greatest virtues, your greatest strengths, when you overcome them. Don't be afraid of them. Merely get to work, roll up your sleeves and get busy working on them, because you won't have anything to feel badly about once those faults have changed. Your anger will become compassion and kindness, and your tendency toward laziness will become a feeling of great peace and calmness, and you'll be able to give that calmness to all, and so on. There isn't a negative quality that doesn't have its own positive polarity, which in time is what you will manifest when you develop yourself spiritually. So, your level of consciousness and your energy. Remember then, I remember talking to Master about some quality I was trying to overcome. And I was saying, it's difficult, sir. And he said, well, habits can be overcome in a day. They are only a matter of the concentration of the mind. Change that concentration, and you don't have the habit anymore at all. Keep that thought in mind. If you can change your concentration, and one thing that can help you to change that concentration is to redirect the flow of energy. You've been putting energy into it. All right, the first thing is pull energy away from it. Remember that letter, those of you who read it in the Ananda newsletter a few weeks ago, to Al? Al was a person who had been suffering physically and expanded his judgment of that suffering to say that God doesn't, there can't be a God, or if there is, he's a sadist, and look at all the suffering in the world and so on. I said, Al, you cannot judge as long as your feelings are affected like this. The safest thing for you to do at this time is simply to not judge, to refuse to judge. In other words, pull energy away from it. If you can't direct energy in a new direction, at least try to withdraw energy from the old. As long as you have to give in to certain things, don't give in totally. I had a very interesting sequence in my own psychological development. When I took up music, I found that I was writing nice songs, and yet I felt, for many years, and to some extent I still feel, that I'm not a musician. Who am I kidding? And people sort of have marveled that I should say that because they like my music. And in fact, I like my music. But why should I say that then? Well, what I was thinking is that people who really are into music are totally immersed in it. That's their whole focus. And to me, it's just something I could do or take or leave alone. I could never write another song, and I wouldn't care at all. And so I thought, well, I'm not dedicated. But gradually I came to understand that it's the lesser people in whatever they do who think that that's what they are. They're too identified with it and can't do a good job. That you can be totally concentrated on something and yet never feel that that's you. You're always, if I think of Bach or Mozart, I think of somebody who loved it but was not bound by it. When I think of the painters like Van Gogh or Hugo Wolf, the musician, the composer, I see people who were totally hypnotized by that thought of music and went mad because they extended too far away from their own true self into a new center which wasn't they. And I realized that to do a good job even of whatever you want to do, you should be able to be doing it from a center that isn't that. And you go from this center with total concentration into what you're doing, but then when you stop doing it, you withdraw into yourself. And it doesn't mean any lack of concentration, it just means that you don't allow yourself to go mad, which is to say, to get your focus outside yourself in something else that you are not. Think of Leonardo and Michelangelo. They were both great artists, for sure. But Leonardo basically was a greater artist, particularly if you look at him from a spiritual point of view. One of the greatest works of Michelangelo was The Last Supper, where you see mostly the agony of the damned. He was an agonized person. And if you look at him, he was almost mad with his total absorption in what he was doing. He was a great artist too, and that's why he pulled it off beautifully. But look at Leonardo. If you look at it from a spiritual standpoint, you see this absolute centeredness. And there's that flow, that beauty. I never was able to understand the Mona Lisa until I could see it personally. It's beautiful when you see it in books and so on, but when you see it personally, there's something else that it's as if it were alive. It's a power that you feel that's incredible. And next to it is a painting I personally like even better of St. John the Baptist, is it? No, or St. John the Beloved. The Baptist, I think. The one where he's got his hand like that? Is it John the Evangelist or what?
That's St. John the Baptist.
Is it the Baptist? Okay. It is so thrilling that you feel that only a saint could have painted that painting. There's so much grace and power. You can't get that sort of thing through books. But when you see it there, it's moving. Well, what I'm saying is that he was somebody he wasn't any of those things. And he could be an artist, he could be an engineer, he could be an inventor, he could write wonderful things, and he was just himself. This is how you need to be in relation to what you are, or what you seem to be, or what you do. That everything that you do from your center, and you don't define yourself in terms of anything that you do. Just say, God is the doer. It doesn't matter. Offer it up to him and leave it. And even if you make a mistake, God is the doer. Believe it or not, he likes that. Because he can't be blamed for anything. But if he's acting through you, then you'll be able to use that energy that you feel flowing through you and turn it in another direction. And so when you do something that you can't help, because of habit, because of the strength of desire, whatever it might be, always inwardly resist it with a part of your being. Always inwardly say, well, all right, but I'm not doing it forever. A saint is a sinner who never gave up. That's a point that we need to keep in mind. That was one of Master's favorite sayings. A saint is a sinner who never gave up. Well, that means that even if all your life you keep on with a fault, Master says that you cannot, God will never let you down as long as you say, I'm still trying. But if you say, I'm licked, if you accept that you have failed, then you're lost, at least for this incarnation. Maybe for several incarnations. But if no matter what you're doing, as long as you inwardly resist and say, never mind, I will keep on until I achieve liberation. And if you fall down 1,000,000 times, just say, I have eternity, it doesn't matter. And just keep getting up. If you can resist in that way and just hold back a little bit, then bit by bit that energy will come. One of the ways that you can play with your own mind and work with your own mental citizens is to keep in mind, well, what is the difference between a positive person and a negative person, an optimist and a pessimist? The optimist will say the bottle is half full, and the pessimist will say it's half empty. You look at failure, and you think, I failed. But if you look at failure with the right attitude, you say, I haven't yet succeeded. And then your very failure becomes an affirmation of success. Your very failure becomes a stepping stone toward greater and greater strength. It's a very important point then to say, any time you slip, all right, I haven't yet succeeded. Think of a painter. He's painting a beautiful portrait, and he puts a line on the face that doesn't quite do it. What's he going to do? If he's an absolute moron, he may take his brush and throw it on the floor and stamp on it and say, oh, I did it again, oh, and they get all excited. But if he's got any brains at all, he'll say, well, I don't quite have it yet. All right, let's see if this will do it. Try it that way. Any time that you fail, don't say, I failed. Just say, I haven't got the knack of it yet. I'm still trying to learn. If it doesn't work this way, all right, then maybe it'll work that way. If it doesn't work that way, maybe it'll work another way. Energy. Pull the energy back from that which you need to overcome so that you can redirect that energy toward what you want to accomplish, what you want to acquire. Think of it in terms of energy. If you think of it that way, you'll find that it's also very important to engage, perhaps is the right word in this case, in those actions that can help to stir your energy in good ways. Being with people who are positive themselves. If you feel negative and distressed and your inclination is to be with negative people, step back a little bit and say, well, do I really enjoy being negative? Do I really enjoy suffering? No. Then why should I not mix with those people who will give me what I want, even if every atom of my psyche screams out in protest against this, that here I am feeling miserable and I'm going to be with all these horribly positive people, is the way you'll think of it. But if you make yourself do it, bit by bit you'll begin to get into their energy. And as you get into that energy, the flow will start, and you'll begin to find that you just don't feel that way anymore. You begin to feel as these positive people do. And then you'll start to see, well, of course, it's the only natural way to feel. The amazing thing is that we tend to think that whatever we are is the only natural way to be. Master was doing the energization exercises in the park, and all the cars were going by and the passengers were rubbernecking, and the disciples were feeling very embarrassed. And Master said, don't feel embarrassed. They only think it's strange because they don't do it. Perfectly true. Don't worry about what other people think or do. I remember I was doing the energization exercises in a hotel in Mexico, in Zihuatanejo, a few years ago. And next to my room was a man. I was standing in the doorway. No, I guess I was in the room, but this man, he was an American, came to talk to me, and so he knocked on the door, and I opened the door, and I stood in the doorway, and I continued the exercises. And I was going... His eyes were getting bigger and bigger. Finally he said, oh, you're exercising. Oh, yeah, that's right. But you don't have to worry about what other people think. Just do what you have to do. Most of them are wrong in their judgments anyway. You might as well accept it. If you worry too much about what they are and where they are coming from, you remember that story of the man and a boy and a donkey. They were taking the donkey to sell in the marketplace. Have you all heard that story? They were taking the donkey to sell. And the man was riding and the boy was walking beside him. And they passed a few people coming from the market. And those people said, look at that man, big and strong and stalwart and making his poor little boy walk. And the man thought, well, gee, I don't want them thinking that about me. So he got down and put the boy on the donkey. And they passed another group coming from the market, and they said, oh, look at that absurd thing, that young, healthy boy walking, and his poor old father, riding, his poor old father has to walk. And so the man thought, well, I don't want that criticism either, and don't want people thinking I'm foolish, so he got on the donkey with his boy. And another group were coming from the market, and they saw him, oh, what cruelty, 2 people riding that miserable little donkey. And so he thought, well, gosh, all right, we'll walk. So they were walking, and they passed another group coming their way, and they laughed even louder. How absurd, a perfectly good donkey to ride, and those people have to walk. And the man was so furious at this point, he'd exhausted every alternative, every possibility. He just crossing a bridge, he pushed the donkey into the water and walked home. So the thing is, you can never please everybody. And most of their judgments are going to be wrong anyway. It would be very wholesome for you to ignore them and just work from within yourself to decide what you need to do in order to get where you want to go. Where you want to go is where very few people want to go anyway. What does the Gita say? Out of 1,000, 1 seeks me. So you can figure on 999 out of 1,000 people doing everything they can to pull you down. I used to think that if my relatives, if I had been a drunk, they would have all been sorry for me, but they wouldn't have been angry with me. But because I came onto the spiritual path, I think my mother's the only one who really understood. That's why I really feel grief in her going. But the rest, they don't. They feel I've betrayed their whole scene because I've come and become a yogi. Well, it's their foolishness. Why should I worry about them? You'll find that most people will be very subconsciously happy if you do something worse than they're doing. But they'll do everything to pull you down that they can if you try to do something better, because they don't feel it within their own hearts to come up to that level. And as long as they see somebody on it, it will be a subconscious, they'll accept it subconsciously as a rebuke. And the best way to get rid of that rebuke is not to change themselves, but to change you for the worse. Don't worry about the world. They misunderstand constantly. They're always coming up with wrong readings of your motives. They'll always say if you're trying to be generous that, oh, what are you trying to get out of me anyway, huh? And other mean attitudes that make them not worth listening to, except with part of your mind waiting for that golden but rare opportunity when somebody says something really helpful. But they don't often say anything helpful. When they're on the spiritual path, it's different. That's what's wonderful about living in a community like this. That if you want to change, and let's say you've gone away for a seclusion, and you've felt a real change take place inside yourself, and you go back to your home, changed, you know what's going to happen. As soon as they see you different, oh, come off it, you're not like that. And before you know it, you're pulled back into your old habits. But if you're living in a spiritual community, what happens is that these people are delighted when they see you doing something that takes you toward God. And they support that change. They don't try to resist it. They will give you every encouragement to be more loving, more forgiving, more generous, more calm, etc. And that's very, very important on the path. You've got all these people helping you, all these people, because that's the battle they're fighting themselves, and so they understand it when you go through this also. Another very important thing being in a community is that you're with people who are trying to do the right thing and not calling meditation fanaticism. People will call anything fanatical if it's doing more than what they're doing. If they never go to church, they'll call going to church fanatical. If they go to church, they'll call praying at night in your own home fanatical. If they pray at home at night, then they'll call it fanatical because people meditate. And so it will be that they will always try to pull you down from anything like that to the point where just because of their influence, you end up thinking that you're being very spiritual if you pat a little dog on the head sometimes and smile at children. It's too difficult. There's too much mud clinging to your feet spiritually for you to feel the incentive to really put hours in of meditation, or because meditation is already something so extraordinary in a world where practically nobody meditates, you'll feel like a hero if you manage an hour a day. And it's pretty bleak news coming to a place like this and finding that an hour is nothing. But pretty soon you start thinking, gosh, well, if everybody's doing it, then I'd better look a little more deeply in my life and try to put out more time to meditate. And so the influence of other people is important. Well, now then, back to what we've been talking about, because I can't make too many points and have them stick. The first thing is to not see the qualities that you're working on or that you would like to overcome as really you. The second thing is to withhold energy from them. The second thing is to try to redirect that energy in a positive way. Try to concentrate in new ways. All right, you may be selfish. You can't help that, but you're many things. You're a kingdom of maybe millions of traits, some of them very deep and subtle and not easily found, but very often you'll be amazed at the little things that'll come out if you have become adept at watching your own mind. The subtlety of thoughts, the subtlety of influences that may be very weak citizens, and yet they're there. So that where basically your reason for helping somebody is very good and noble, but somewhere in the back of your mind there may be some ignoble motive. Whatever it might be, I could mention several. I don't think I need to go into any of them. There could be a mixture of some subtle thoughts that are not good and that you wish weren't there, but there they are. So you are many things. Pull back from those and then shift your concentration somewhere else. And don't think that I've got to overcome this trait before I can develop that trait. You don't have to. That's the fortunate thing about it. You can put more energy into the positive side, withholding energy from here only. Put more energy into some good quality, and gradually that will become so strong that it'll create a magnet that will draw the other up into it. So you don't need to worry about the fact that you are too much this or that. Just try to be more of what you want to be. For example, let's say you don't have enough control over your palate. Well, don't worry about that, but try to develop control in other ways that are easier to you. And then whittle away at this other one. Whittle away at little things, like denying yourself something that you might have enjoyed eating, like eating a little bit of something that you don't like. If it's a very good practice, in fact, that you put on your plate a little piece of whatever it is that you normally would reject, and make yourself eat that. It doesn't destroy your enjoyment in the whole meal, but it's a little bit of control. And what you'll find is that big victories are very often won by little small battles won. This is how, if you've read War and Peace by Tolstoy, you'll recall his account of how the Russians destroyed the Grand Army of Napoleon. They didn't have the army to oppose Napoleon. The cold was what first of all destroyed it, but then the Russian general kept his troops against their own will from a confrontation, but he whittled away the sides, bit by bit, where he could. He would fight the battles he could win, until finally the army was debilitated enough for him to be able to attack it much more head-on. And this is the way that you can accomplish your victories too. That if you will see, all right, I've got these people who really belong in a prison, but I've got these people who belong in a monastery or in a church. They're very good, and they're my good troops. And so I'm going to give them more power. I won't worry about these bad people yet because I haven't the strength to handle them. But I'll fight those battles I can, and I'll put energy toward those qualities that I can develop into solid virtues, and then I will find that the strength here is so great that the other won't have any power anymore. This is how it's how I've organized things. It's been my technique for organizing, and it's really worked. When I had the task at Mount Washington of organizing the monks, Master put me in charge of the monks there. I was 23, and that's pretty young. I'd been there a year, and many of the other monks were quite a lot older, and most of them were somewhat older than I, and quite a few of them simply wouldn't take it. But there were a few who were willing to go along with it because they recognized we hadn't ever had a rule there. We hadn't ever had organization. It seems strange, but it was so. And Master simply didn't have enough time and energy in his life to get everything together. And he had to work too hard on writing his books and giving lectures and so on. So in all those years, the monks hadn't been organized. Well, I took this small group of people who were willing to meditate together, and we would meet together, do the energization exercises together, meditate together, and I just didn't worry about the others. And bit by bit, this group became stronger. And as it became stronger, 1 or 2, 3, 4 of the others began to join also. And after a time, it reached the point where the others simply left. It simply was no longer their place. And I found that developing Ananda that way too, it was like that, because I didn't have a large body of students who wanted to move here. I didn't have a congregation to build this thing for me. I was just on my own. I had a lot of students who were taking classes from me, but they were interested in yoga. They weren't interested in a community. And when I started a community, the word went out, and people who were interested in community came here, but the majority of them even were people who weren't interested in me or even in Master necessarily, but they didn't think of it as my vision. It was something they wanted to take over and make their way. And that's all right if people have good ideas, but many of these ideas weren't good. I'd spent 30 years studying the issue and thinking how to overcome this particular difficulty, what that difficulty might mean, how to bring about perfection in some other line, and so on. I'd gone around the world, I'd studied, I'd read, I'd meditated, and I had quite a lot to bring to offer it, plus all those years that I was in charge of all those people at Mount Washington and elsewhere. So I had a lot of experience, and many young people came in with some very callow, raw idea of what they wanted, and if we had gone their direction, the whole place would just not have lasted. It would have folded. And so I had to sort of guide it, but I couldn't be a dictator, because if I chose to be a dictator, it's easy to drive people. It's not easy to lead them, as Satya Sai Baba wrote me once. It's very difficult to lead them by winning them gradually. And there were some people, there was quite a group here in fact, that I had only to make a suggestion and they automatically would be opposed to it, just because the suggestion had come from me and they weren't about to let me think that I was in charge. So what did I do? There was it would have been a total waste of time sitting there throwing tantrums. I could have left. What's the use of that? I was trying to get something going. So I had a few people who were in tune. And through them, through Jyotish and Seva, particularly, then Devi and Shivani, we began to get more and more people really working together in a harmonious group. Well, negative energy doesn't cohere, positive does. And you get positive people working together, and that creates a strength where the others begin to be drawn in if they have right motive, or I can't say that all their motives were wrong just because they weren't in tune with what we were doing, but they were wrong to what we were doing. They were wrong for what we were doing, because we could not do all of them and have a single unit. It would have exploded. So in terms of what we were trying to accomplish, it was wrong because it was not compatible with the overall picture. And so what these people finally did was leave. And some of them are still bitter, but there's no reason to be bitter. They just hoped to win, and they didn't win, that's all. No point in getting bitter about that sort of thing. We won not by fighting against them. We won by creating a power of positive, harmonious energy here. For instance, Seva didn't come to the office and dictate that everybody had to come to the office on time. She merely came every day at 9 o'clock. She'd been accustomed to doing that in the world. She was in charge of a large office there. And so she came to work regularly, and people began to sort of feel uncomfortable if they didn't also. And bit by bit, in this way, by example, by harmonious ways, we got everybody into doing things so that now you see a community that is as different from what it was 13 years ago as night and day. So, you will find this also in yourselves. That if you will concentrate, don't worry about your negative qualities. Withdraw or withhold energy. Direct that energy in a positive way. Try to see how maybe some of that energy can be channeled in a better way by uniting it with something else. Work on these traits as if they were people. And see how well this person, if he were working with that person, might in fact come out of his slump. So you find this negative trait and get it to working with this other trait in yourself, and you may find that, oh, suddenly they both work well together and it's just fine. There are so many millions of ways of describing this that I don't even know how to begin. But just as one example, there was somebody who came here who, or was thinking of coming here, who didn't have any real understanding of our philosophy. And I thought, well, the only way that we could draw him in would be if I put him to work with people who work in the way he likes to work. He liked to do carpentry. If he was with them and had a bond with them in the fact that they did carpentry together, but they were meditating and devotional, he might find that that bond that they did have drew him into their devotion, and he would become a devotee too. In this in this particular case, it didn't work simply because he never came, but it was still a good theory, and it has worked in many cases that simply haven't sprung into my mind while talking about it, which you will be able to put to use also in your own life. That if you can find a bond between a negative and a positive trait that can make you bring these two together, you may find that that which they have in common will ultimately transform that negative trait into the positive one. Remember one other important point, and that is that a stronger magnetism will always overcome a weaker magnetism. So that if you have a weakly good person and a strongly bad person, and you try to think of making that bad person good by putting him with the weak person, what he will do is you'll have two bad people. It's the simple law of magnetism, and you must understand it because it's vitally important. If you've got a negative trait that you simply cannot help, its magnetism is too strong, its hypnosis is too strong on your mind, then don't try to think, yes, but I've got to, and you keep bringing troops in that aren't as strong as they are, they'll succumb. You'll get worse and worse and worse. Withhold energy from it. Just sort of surround it by, neutralize it as much as you can, and start working on your troops here. It's just as if we had the Russians take over this country, let's say, in a war, The only way we could win is if we could have guerrillas up in the mountains gradually developing an army strong enough finally to come in and beat them. And meanwhile maybe whittle away at their forces. You must develop your strength separate from the negative magnetism that you're trying to weed out of your consciousness. So, magnetism is very important. Recognize your strengths and your weaknesses. Don't just go with wishful thinking. When you can unite positive traits, for example, you might have many good qualities, but they take you in different directions. You may well not to think in terms of these qualities being virtues in themselves, but we can understand them more easily. The person may be an artist and musician and a good athlete and a good composer or singer or whatever. Each one of these things will take him in a different direction, and it's been said that people who are multi-talented are generally not happy. Why? Because they have energy going in so many different directions that they end up sort of utterly frustrated in the middle, not being able to accomplish anything. Well, if a person could learn to harness all of these things in a single direction, like offering all of them up to serving God, let's say, so that those different troops unite, then you've got power. Then you can use that power in a concerted action to work on negative traits. So when you're thinking about your virtues, and don't be timid about them, recognize that they are good, and these are tools that you've got to work with. You don't have to be proud about them, but to see them as tools. Then work to bring them together to a focus so that they aren't scattered all over the place. If you've got an army scattered too far and wide, a weak army will be able to come in and take over. Bring the forces together, concentrate them, and you will be able then to generate that kind of magnetism that will be able to transform negative into positive magnetism also. So direct your energies in a positive way. Work with yourself as if you were working with a whole populace or with a community. Recognize that all these traits are different aspects of your consciousness, but none of them you. And so play with them the way you would with children. I mean, play with them, well, the way you would with a chessboard, let's say, because we're talking of discipline here. To learn how to marshal your forces in order to change the instrument that you're working with, your own personality, and transform it into a divine personality, ultimately to realize that you aren't a personality at all, you are the divine. Recognize always that God is your reality. Always bring Him into the picture, and remember that where His power is, finally victory has to come. So the most important thing of this is not merely to work in a psychological way, not on that level. From the superconscious level, you'll be able to do a lot more work and a lot more effectively. Working from that superconscious, you'll be able to see things in their true proportion, and you'll be able to bring that clarity to them that will help you to overcome them more quickly. Thus, what I'm saying is that of all the positive directions that you can go in, that you can send your energy in, the most important is that which leads toward the superconscious. Devotion, remembrance of God, keeping the presence of Him, serving Him, meditation. These are the most important actions of all. That's why it's been said that a person can be a criminal, but if he loves God, he's far ahead of a virtuous person who doesn't love God, because he's working on the most important virtue of all, devotion to God.